The Starfleet life with the USS Dauntless. Are you brave enough to be a Starfleet officer? Do you have what it takes?
Here we go. Greetings. I am Admiral Swart, Commanding Officer of the USS Dauntless, and this is the briefing with the Admiral for stardate -25 1822.1. I am the Admiral in question, and today we're going to be talking about mission-specific readiness as it relates to new Trek watch parties. I'll explain what all of that means, but first let's do the housekeeping. Which is to say that we record these sessions on Tuesday at 12:30 South African Standard Time. If you are an active duty member of the Dauntless crew, then you're welcome to join us live on Discord in the screening room channel. You can participate in the chat. You can ask me questions, make comments, or just drop memes, whatever, whatever works for you. If you're not an active duty member of the Dauntless, you're welcome to join our live stream on YouTube. It's usually working. I think it's working today. And hopefully I'll be able to see if anybody posts comments or questions in the chat there as well. If not, if you're not able to join us at this time, which is admittedly awkward, middle of the day on a Tuesday, then you're welcome to watch the video after the fact. It will remain on YouTube indefinitely. We're no longer posting these to Facebook, unfortunately. Facebook's video upload system just isn't working anymore. But YouTube is still with us, so YouTube, it shall remain. You're welcome to drop comments or questions in the comment thread there, or if you have comments or questions that you don't want to transmit publicly, you're welcome to reach out to me privately via various instant messaging platforms, smoke signals, subspace radio, whatever works for you. I should be able to get that message. If you are in the chat in Discord, you're one of our active duty members who are participating live, please make sure that you @tag me with your comment or question, so when we get to the Q&A section at the end, that I can find your question when I'm scrolling back up through the chat, because there is often a lot of lively conversation, which is fantastic, but not all of it is relevant to me. So I want to find the stuff that you need me to address, so please make sure that you mention me in your comment or question so that it's highlighted on my screen and I can find it when the time comes. But who am I? Who are we? What are we doing here? What's this all about? So we are the USS Dauntless, which is a future-focused advocacy and action group that is at its core a Star Trek fan club. We are a chapter of Starfleet, the International Star Trek Fan Association Incorporated, which is the world's largest organized Star Trek fan community. And we're one of hundreds of chapters in dozens of countries around the world. Our chapter, USS Dauntless, is a starship. That is the metaphor that Starfleet International uses for its chapters. Each chapter is a starship. The ship, of course, is not a real starship. The ship is just a metaphor for the ideological and doctrinal binds that link us together as a crew. So the ship is not a ship. The ship is the crew. Our ship is located in Cape Town, South Africa. That is our physical headquarters, but really most of what we do springs out of our Discord server, which of course is online, which allows us to have members in various places around the world. So physically centered on Cape Town, South Africa, but we have other things happening elsewhere as well. The purpose of today's briefing, as I mentioned, is mission-specific readiness as it relates to new Star Trek watch parties. So this is the first in a series, I think, of these briefings that I want to go through intermittently, in which we talk about mission readiness as it relates to specific mission profiles. So mission readiness is a doctrine that we have here on the Dauntless, which relates to the overall approach to self-improvement, right? We want to become the best possible Starfleet officer that we can become so that we are ready for whatever mission may come. But we have a lot of missions that are regular and anticipated, and missions that keep coming up over and over again. And I think there's utility in discussing what steps we can take to make ourselves more ready as possible for those specific mission profiles. And the first one of those is a new Star Trek watch party, which is a mission that happens fairly often these days, which is pretty good. So this is not a change in philosophy. We're not divorcing ourselves from that old doctrine of mission readiness. We're diving into a more specific application of it as it relates to those specific missions, as opposed to our broader mission, which is to promote Star Trek and move our world towards an optimistic future as envisioned in the Star Trek universe. Although that remains our broader mission, we do have smaller discrete missions, individual things that we do either in the world or here on Discord, and we want to address what being ready means for each of those discrete mission types, the ones that we encounter most often. So what that does then, of course, is it gives us clear targets for readiness as it applies to practical day-to-day realities here aboard the Dauntless. Okay, I've explained that. Next in my notes is, all right, so what is a new track watch party? What does that mean? So this is one of 2 formal programs that the Dauntless has, which is designed to foster the crew's relationship with Star Trek. Why do we want that? Well, we are a Star Trek fan club, right? Ostensibly, at least at our core is the word that I use. I also like to say that we are inspired by Star Trek. Describing the Dauntless as a Star Trek fan club is not inaccurate, but it is imprecise, and it's verbiage that I tend to steer away from, just because in my perception, describing us as that gives people a false impression. You get pictures in your head of a bunch of nerds sitting in a basement talking about our Star Trek collectibles and joking about Star Trek. And while that's true, we do all of those things. We do a lot more than just that. That is one of our core activities, I would argue, but we are inspired by the vision and the values of Star Trek to do much more than that. And that is what differentiates us from regular fan clubs. So Star Trek is our philosophical core, right? It's where we spring from. It's where we derive our inspiration from. It's the reason that we exist as a community. And because of all that, it is very, very important to sustain the ongoing trajectory of this organization, the USS Dauntless, of Starfleet International, of this entire community and each of its various chapters and institutions. That engaging with Star Trek is kind of non-negotiable. We need to be doing that regularly, as often as possible even. The one program that I'm going to be referring to a couple of times during today's presentation, but it's not what we're here to talk about, is what I call the Daily Devotional Program. And this is it's a project of mine. It's a personal project that I give as a gift to our crew, in which we study the entire Star Trek canon in chronological order. Each day we have an episode which is automatically posted to a specific channel on the Discord. It's the Future History channel if you're looking for it there. The name and details of that episode are posted there, as well as a link to the Memory Alpha page. Memory Alpha is the Star Trek wiki for the canon Star Trek universe. And then we're invited to watch that episode in our own time and then discuss it there on that channel as much as we wish to. That is the program that I offer on my own. I do it for myself and then I share it with the crew. Let's put it that way. The other program is one that is formally embedded in the crew structure, which means that it is provided by the science department. So the science department is our division here on the Dauntless that is tasked with research and education. And sharing new Star Trek content with the crew falls into both of those camps. That it's both research and it's facilitating research with the crew, and it is education because you're presenting that material to us. So research and education is the science department's job, and therefore the new Star Trek watch parties fall in their purview. And what these watch parties are typically is when a new episode of Star Trek is released in any given week, which usually happens on a Thursday. That is the release cadence that is currently happening with Paramount Plus, which is where new Star Trek is released in the US. We gather together as a crew here in Discord, and we will watch that episode together, usually on a Friday evening, which it gives everybody enough time to sort of get their stuff together. And Friday is typically a more convenient time. We watch that episode together on a Friday. We engage in a conversation about it. We explore it together and we study it together, right? That is what a new Star Trek watch party is. There is another version of it, which happens far less frequently, hasn't happened since 2016, which is when a new Star Trek theatrical released feature film comes out, then we will physically go out in our various away missions to the theater and attend together in uniform. As I mentioned, that happens far less frequently. I think it's happened twice or in the whole history of the Dauntless. Or is it only three times? Three times in the history of the Dauntless. Since we were founded, there have been only three feature films, theatrical release feature films in the Star Trek franchise. So very, very rare that happens. But when it happens, that's what we do. So we're not really going to be talking about that version of it, although a lot of what we'll be discussing today does apply there as well. The one that happens far more frequently, thankfully, these days, is the one where we are watching together on Discord. So at the moment, there are two ongoing Star Trek series. There is Star Trek Strange New Worlds, which wrapped up its third season a few months ago, and we're expecting the fourth season to drop sometime this year. And as I'm recording this, Star Trek Starfleet Academy is busy releasing its first season. We're about halfway through season 1. And so with every new episode that comes out on a Thursday, we gather together that Friday evening here in Discord, and we stream it together. We watch it together here in Discord. So what the purpose of the mission is it's to provide the opportunity for all active duty crew members to engage with new Star Trek free of charge. Now, this is limited only to active duty personnel. So it's the same group of people who have access to the screening room channel. In fact, it happens in the same channel on our Dauntless Discord server. And these are people that have chosen to become actively engaged members of the Dauntless crew. This doesn't apply to reserves. It doesn't apply to civilians or invited guests or friends or family or anything like that. This is active duty personnel only. And at the most basic level, what these watch parties do is it's intended to remove friction. So they're intended to ensure that we have the opportunity to engage with new Star Trek content, and that it's not gated by platform availability. You know, what service do you subscribe to, your personal finances, can you afford to buy it or not, fragmented release schedules, because sometimes even though shows are in syndication, international syndication, for example, Star Trek Starfleet Academy is syndicated to South Africa via the Showmax streaming platform, the release schedule is fragmented, which means that it only drops here, new episodes drop here 6 days after they drop in the States. So that's a little inconvenient. And there are also individual technical limitations. Somebody might not be able to get their hands on the new episode because they simply don't have the wherewithal, the skills, or the tools. So these watch parties are intended to eliminate all of those frustrations and make sure that each member of the Dauntless active duty crew can see that new episode as it's new, as it's fresh, before the spoilers stop dropping online and that kind of thing. So it's not about entitlement or convenience, although both of those things are relevant. This is about fairness of opportunity within the crew. So if Star Trek is a shared cultural and philosophical touchstone for the Dauntless, which it definitely is, then access to the new material as it becomes available should not depend on private means or individual circumstances. By providing that opportunity centrally and internally, the Dauntless keeps engagement communal rather than stratified. So we're not separating the crew into the haves and the have-nots. We're separating the crew only into those that choose to engage and those that do not. If you're choosing to engage, then here you are, congratulations. If you're not choosing to engage, then that's fine, that's your choice. And ensures that readiness for cultural missions is not unevenly distributed. What it also does is it creates a shared cultural moment within the Dauntless crew. So we're watching the same episode at the same time. Doing that matters more than it appears to. It creates a shared viewing creates a synchronized experience. We get the same surprises, we get the same questions, we have the same emotional beats at the same time. And that synchronicity can't be recreated later in quite the same way, right? If you're watching on your time and I'm watching on my time, we're not going to be able to synchronize up our experiences of that unless we're sharing it together, unless we're watching it together. Once our opinions harden and once the discourse fragments, you know, these people have this opinion, these people have that opinion, something subtle is lost in that experience. Watching it raw together for the first or maybe the second time, that is the purest communal experience of that content. And the watch parties preserve that moment of the encounter, the brief window, and it is very brief, days at best, where the meaning hasn't yet settled in and interpretation is still kind of fluid. That moment is where shared culture is actually formed. It's not just reinforced, right? The daily devotionals, that's where it's reinforced. That's where we're rewatching content that we've already experienced before, probably most of us, and we're reinforcing our familiarity with the material. But the New Trek watch parties, that's when it's built. That's where the initial shared experience is created. It allows real-time discussion and sense making as a community. So as a group, we get to participate together in making sense of what this new content is telling us. Star Trek's designed to be thought about, right? It's not meant to be a passive watching experience. It's meant to be turned over in your head and questioned and evaluated. It's always been that way since the beginning. Real-time discussion here in Discord allows us to we can start to surface different interpretations immediately, because although we're watching the same content, you might read it differently than how I read it. That happens quite a lot. And a lot of that is intentional. A lot of the show creators will intentionally bake in ambiguity because they want viewers to be able to view that material in multiple different ways and read different things out of it. And that gives us an opportunity to explore that in the moment. It gives us an opportunity to catch details that others missed, right? Sometimes things happen very fast and you might not see everything that comes up on the screen because maybe you're busy typing a comment, maybe you're making a joke, maybe you're yawning or had to pop to the loo or something like that. Somebody else might have caught it and they mentioned it in the chat, and that allows you to recognize the thing that you might have missed. It allows you to test your initial reactions against the collective insight. So your initial response, you can, by sharing that with the group in the moment, you can see what the rest of the group thinks about your perspective. Maybe they disagree. Maybe they think that your reading of it is incorrect, or maybe there's a factual error in your assumptions or something like that. And it allows you to test that right away before you really lock into your perspective on things. And here's an important point that I think can't be understated, in that it allows you to hold uncertainty without rushing to rushing to conclusions. What I mean by that is it allows you to, especially when there's ambiguity or lack of clarity, which is, as I said, it's a tool used by show creators to create narrative tension. It allows you to hold that in your mind and suspend conclusion, suspend rationalization, suspend justification, or even criticism, and just hold it there for a moment, turn it over with the rest of the crew, and then let the conclusions come naturally when the time comes. So this kind of communal sense making is qualitatively different from an asynchronous debate when we're watching content months or years or maybe just days after it's released, and then we're debating it after the fact. What it does is it favors curiosity over certainty. So we're coming at it with open minds, open hearts, open eyes, and allowing that new content to sort of absorb on its own terms, instead of coming with our preconceived ideas where we've already done our research, we've already looked things up, we've already sort of cemented our positions. And it allows us to explore rather than sharing our verdicts. Verdicts come later. Don't get me wrong, there's plenty of space for that kind of discourse, and we love that kind of thing. But there's a relatively narrow window where we have this live first encounter that's happening. Excuse me, my non-humanoid companion is being disruptive. This is Harris. Importantly, what it does is it allows us to model how to think together, right? As a collective, as a community, we can process this and digest this new content as a group. And that's a skill that translates beyond just watch parties. It translates to leadership, whether that be here on the Dauntless or in your various other careers or spheres of influence. Diplomacy, sort of negotiating difficult situations, and also to our internal culture here on the Dauntless. If we're able to sort of get used to the idea of thinking together as a group, then that fosters a sense of group cohesion that's difficult to replicate elsewhere. What these things also do is they strengthen continuity and shared reference, but without coercion. So continuity and shared reference are quite important when it comes to an institution like the Dauntless, where we have a baked-in sort of vocabulary of language. And our vocabulary is both in terms of ideas and words and imagery and symbols. If we are all equally familiar with the source material, then we are all operating off the same lexicon. We're all working off the same word book. We're all using the same language to be able to communicate. If people are out of step with that, excuse me, this boy wants a lap. Okay. If we're out of step with that, then it makes it more difficult for us to communicate as a group. So over time, organizations either maintain their shared reference points deliberately, or they lose them by default. These things will drift out of use. And watch parties allow us to strengthen that continuity by keeping the crew literate in the current Star Trek, which is culturally at least the most relevant, because that's what everybody's talking about, the current stuff. It prevents drift into purely nostalgic or selective engagement. These are the people that refuse to watch anything after Enterprise, or refuse to watch anything after the original series or something like that. And those Star Trek fans exist, and there's a place for them. But I encourage all Star Trek fans to not let themselves get stuck in that, right? Being limited to just a particular canon is, I think, overly restrictive. You don't have to like all Star Trek equally. That's an important point that I keep coming back to. You don't have to love every aspect of it. But if you love Star Trek, you have to accept that all of it is Star Trek, right? We as fans do not get to decide what is or is not canon. That's not the nature of this material. Paramount are they're the ones who are creating it. They're the custodians of it, and they're the ones that get to tell us what is or is not canon, and we don't really get to choose. We get to choose what we like and what we don't like. That's within the privacy of our own head, but all of it is Star Trek, if they say it is. And it maintains a common narrative vocabulary across ranks and departments. I already spoke about that. So crucially, this is done without coercion, right? Nobody's being herded into this and being forced to learn a list of words, because attendance at these missions is it's expected but not enforced. This is a priority 2 mission, and I'm going to go more into priority 2 missions in a moment. Engagement is encouraged but not policed, right? If you attend but you don't say anything in the chat, you don't have anything to contribute, that's fine. We're not going to make you do it. We're not going to call you out. And the result of that is a continuity that's sustained by buy-in rather than by obligation. And that balance is important because it reinforces the Dauntless's broader philosophy that culture is strongest when people choose to participate, when they actively engage because they understand the value of doing so, not because they're compelled to. Which brings us to how these missions are classified. So I'm going to dispense with initially that the in-person watch parties, when there is a new theatrical release and we have to go to the theater, those missions are priority 1, but again, those are rare. These watch parties that take place every week, the episodic watch parties, we'll call them that by means of differentiation, these are classified as priority 2. So they sit in an unusual space. They're important, they matter, but they don't matter in the same way as every other mission type. We have the priority system specifically to express those differences. All missions are important, but some are more important than others in key ways. It's not about ranking them in terms of prestige. It's about understanding what level of commitment the different mission profiles call for. So watch parties are, as I say, classified as priority 2, which is defined as active duty personnel are expected to attend. And they have that classification because they're important to the internal health of the crew, but they don't carry immediate external consequences. They're recurring, they're predictable, and they're sustainable. They're not happening every single week. Unfortunately, we just don't have that much new Star Trek happening at the time. We've got 2 ongoing series. Each one is dropping a 10-episode season roughly once per year at the moment. So that's 18 to 20 weeks out of the entire year, if we're lucky, that we get a new Star Trek episode. So it's not all the time, but when it's happening, it's every week. So it is predictable and it's recurring and it is sustainable because you just have to open up that slot in your schedule and you can just keep coming. Missing one isn't ideal, but it doesn't break the mission in a way that can't be repaired, right? We still go ahead regardless. So classifying it as priority 2, that communicates to us, to the team, that the mission matters. It's important. It's more important than a priority 3. Participation is expected. You are expected to attend. Real life is acknowledged, right? We're not scheduling these as priority 1s. We're not making them mandatory because we know that things happen, right? Friday night, not everybody can make it every Friday night. That's understandable. And importantly, with this specific mission profile is that continuity can be maintained through personal responsibility. And we'll get to how that we do that in a moment. And that combination of factors is exactly what watch parties require. Why don't we consider them priority 1 if they are so important? Priority 1 missions are reserved for situations where failure or absence has consequences beyond the individual, whether that is a recipient of a blood donation dies because they didn't receive that blood unit, or the crew are not able to follow through with their mission because they don't have sufficient support crew, or whatever it might be. If a priority 1 mission is missed or mishandled, someone outside the organization is affected, or the chapter's public credibility is impacted, or the opportunity cannot be meaningfully repeated. Weekly watch parties don't meet that criteria. They're not at that level. There's no external stakeholder that's relying on us attending. The episode is still available after the watch party has ended. It might be difficult to get hold of, but it can be done. And any loss of continuity can be corrected. So if you miss one, it's not the end of the world. You can just pick it up next week. Classifying these missions as priority 1 would misrepresent the nature of the mission and would erode the meaning of the priority 1 mission classification. So it doesn't apply to this mission. So why the episodic watch parties are priority 2 are not priority 3, pardon me. They're not priority 3 because P3 missions are optional enrichment. They add value, but the organization, the Dauntless, continues to function normally if participation is low or irregular or inconsistent. It's not a big deal if few people come to priority 3 missions. Obviously, we want everybody to come to priority 3 missions. Attendance is encouraged, but watch parties aren't optional in that way. We still need people to attend, right? You're still needed. We need you to come. They are one of the core mechanisms by which the Dauntless maintains a shared relationship with Star Trek, which again is the codification of our core philosophy. If participation dropped off entirely, the crew would gradually lose that shared frame of reference, the shared timing and the shared context that being up to date on the new Star Trek material creates. And that makes these missions structurally important, not just recreational. It's not just for fun. It actually matters for us as an institution that we participate in these missions. So priority 2 is the correct fit here because it's the category used for missions that are internally important. They're repeating and long running sometimes. They're designed to fit alongside real-world obligations. We try to avoid scheduling priority 2 missions during workdays, for example. These briefings, although I would argue they're quite important, because they have to be scheduled during a workday, it would be non-viable to schedule these as priority 2. It just would not be fair to everybody. Priority 2 missions are designed to fit alongside real-world obligations, so you can still carry on with your life. It's just an hour a week for 8 or 9 weeks in a row. And it's dependent on trust rather than enforcement, right? So priority 1 missions have to be enforced. We have to track participation. We have to monitor everybody coming and going. We have to keep track of who has excused themselves from the mission and who hasn't, because the consequences of those missions are so much greater. Priority 2, we're not doing all of that. Although we are still tracking attendance, we're not watching attendance. Classifying watch parties as priority 2 signals the seriousness, but without coercion. They're important, but without urgency. And we have an expectation, but without any kind of punitive intent, right? It tells us that this matters enough that we plan around it. We plan our lives so that we can attend these missions, and we entrust you, the Starfleet officer, the Dauntless crew member, to engage with it responsibly. And that's not a compromised position. That is the classification that most accurately reflects what the mission actually is. What do I mean by we trust you to engage with it responsibly? So let's talk about this in terms of the trust model. When Dauntless Command classifies a mission as priority 2, it's making a deliberate choice about how responsibility is exercised within the context of that mission. P2 missions operate on a trust rather than active enforcement model, but they are not without consequence. Both of those statements are true at the same time. So priority 2 means that the mission matters to the internal life of the organization, that participation is expected, that attendance isn't compelled in the moment. It's not mandatory. So that is command saying, this mission is important enough that we expect engagement and we trust you to decide how to meet that expectation. So that's not a soft category. It's a category designed for adult judgment. We have no cadets on board. Everybody here is a grown-up and we expect you to behave like one. We trust crew members to judge your attendance responsibly. So crew members are trusted to decide when attendance is appropriate based on your fatigue and health. If you're sick in bed and you can't concentrate, or you're falling asleep because you pulled an all-nighter last night, then perhaps you should skip tonight's watch party. Your family and work obligations. If you've got a child in hospital, or if you had to work late, then obviously you're not going to be able to make it to the watch party tonight. Your mental and emotional bandwidth. If there's just no way that you can even process the episode or participate in a conversation about it because your mental and emotional bandwidth are so eroded, perhaps you should give it a skip. There's no permission seeking and there's no justification required. We don't need an excuse from you or anything like that. Occasional absence is normal and expected, right? That is the nature of this kind of mission. But this trust assumes on the part of the staff lead officer a good faith participation over time, not perpetual opting out, right? Just because it's not mandatory doesn't mean you don't have to ever show up. We are expecting you to turn up most of the time, and only on rare exceptions when you simply can't make it, that's when you decide to not attend. If a crew member misses a watch party, the trust continues, right? And they are trusted to watch the episode independently, to get hold of that episode themselves and watch it in their own time before next week. So catching up before the next shared viewing. And if they're not clear on how to get their hands on that episode, to ask for guidance, drop a message in the bridge channel. Somebody there will be able to point you in the right direction and explain to you how to get your hands on that episode so that you can watch it before next week's watch party. No one's checking boxes or issuing reminders about doing that. Continuity is maintained through self-direction. We're trusting you to do that yourself. Priority 2 in this context assumes a level of avoid grievance first postures during watch parties. So we're not airing our grievances, making complaints. We are participating in ways that support the shared experience, right? So we are contributing to a group project here by participating in these watch parties. We're not just here to air our dirty laundry or vent our opinions. Because this is an internal space, internal to the Dauntless, behavior is guided by culture rather than by rules. Also, trust doesn't mean an absence of consequences. When priority 2 missions aren't actively policed, which they aren't, patterns of non-participation are visible over time. So we do take a roll call at each mission. You don't necessarily see it happening because we don't have the roll call procedure that we would have for a priority 1 event, although sometimes we do. A roll call is taken each time and it is recorded when you've participated, and those records are kept. Although we're not necessarily looking each time to see who showed up and who didn't, we are monitoring that behavior over time. So if we see that there is a pattern of non-participation, a pattern of non-attendance, that's going to be obvious, right? Command will notice that. And as a matter of policy and of practice, crew members who fail to attend more than 50% of priority 2 missions over a period, let's call it a year or a quarter or whatever, crew members who fail to meet that threshold are ineligible for advancement opportunities. We recognize that you're choosing not to engage with some of our most important missions, and that is telling us, that's giving us a signal. It's telling us that you don't want to be advanced through the Dauntless recognition systems. It's not enforcement in real time. We're not going to smack you down. We're not going to give you a warning or a penalty or a disciplinary action. We're not giving you a fail to report in flag like there would be for a priority 1 mission. But sustained disengagement from priority 2 missions does carry information. It tells us something, and that information is relevant when advancement is considered. So why does this affect advancement? Why do we have this as a consequence here? Because advancement on the Dauntless isn't automatic. It reflects your demonstrated engagement over time, your sustained participation in the organization's core activities, which is priority 1 and priority 2 missions, and willingness to invest time and attention in the shared institutional life, which is why these missions are important. So P2 missions exist precisely to make that engagement visible without coercion. So we don't want to be twisting your arm, bending your elbow like we would with priority 1 missions. We want you to come because you want to engage. And if somebody consistently chooses to not participate in P2 missions, they're making a valid choice. They're welcome to choose that if they like, but it's a choice that signals limited alignment with deeper responsibility. Ineligibility for advancement is therefore, it's not a punishment. It's a recognition of a misalignment between participation and aspiration. And this relates to broader mission readiness philosophy here, because this is a model that actually supports self-improvement. A purely enforced system produces compliance, but a purely optional system produces drift. So that's P1 versus P3. But the P2 trust model sits deliberately between those two extremes. It allows autonomy in the moment. You can choose your outcome. Accountability over time. So we will notice your patterns of behavior. And space for self-assessment and course correction. At any time during the process, because these effects only accumulate over time, you can recognize that you've maybe missed a few P2 missions, and you can make a choice within yourself to ensure that that doesn't happen anymore. The expectation is simple and unstated, although I'm about to state it now. If you want to grow here on the Dauntless, you will choose to be present where the organization actually lives. And that expectation isn't shouted, right? We don't talk about it that often. It isn't really policed, but it is real. Okay, that's enough about the P2 stuff. Let's talk about what the mission actually looks like, right? So what these watch party missions, how they are structured is, again, I mentioned that they are run by the science department. We join together on a Friday night at 1900 South African Standard Time. That is the current schedule, although that could change. So don't hold me to that a year from now. The Friday night aligns with the release schedules. The new episodes drop internationally in the US and Canada, and maybe a couple of other markets on Thursday. So we, in order to be realistic about being able to gain access to that episode, we scheduled it for the next day. So we've got more than 24 hours to get our hands on it. Then we watch it together in Discord, live streamed, and then we participate in the chat. Surrounding that, we have other recommendations. We encourage, recommend, maybe those two words are overstating it. We allow, permit, private previewing as preparation. So if you're able to get your hands on that episode earlier, then by all means, go ahead and watch it yourself first. This isn't a contradiction. This is preparation for the mission, so that you can concentrate on certain details that maybe you overlooked on your first viewing, or you can take a moment away from giving the episode your full attention so you can participate in the chat. That's fine. There's nothing at all wrong with that. As long as it's been relatively recent, like within the last few hours or whatever, that you watched that episode yourself, so that it's all still fresh in your mind, and that your opinions and your ideas about it haven't yet crystallized. That's the key, is that finding that window. For that reason, for a lot of us, the watch parties function as a second viewing, which is fine. As long as it's new and fresh, that's what matters. And it gives us that increased mental bandwidth for discussion and interpretation. But now let's talk about the mission readiness side of things. So how do we get ready for these missions? Now, in terms of our mission readiness philosophy, we have our 3 pillars of mission readiness. We've got physical, mental, and what up until recently I've been describing as emotional, but this triad has made its way into canon. I'm going to assume that because the writers of Star Trek have been watching these briefings, but they have rebranded the third leg from what I used to call emotional to spiritual, which I think is largely, we're talking about the same thing. It's just a different framing of the same idea. So in order to align our philosophy with Star Trek canon, I'm going to start using that word spiritual to describe that third leg of mission readiness, because essentially it's the same thing. So let's talk about mission readiness as individual crew members. How do we get ready for the watch party missions in alignment with each one of those pillars? All three of those pillars are represented here, by the way. So let's start with physical. Physical readiness for a watch party is about removing friction between the officer, yourself, and the shared experience. So actual physical things that need to be done in the world. First one, what you need, the equipment that you need in order to participate in a watch party is a workstation or a pad with reliable internet and working audio, which allows you to then sign into Discord and then watch the video and participate in the chat. Recommend using a desktop or laptop workstation because the interface for desktop-based versions of Discord make it easier for you to both watch streaming video and participate in the chat simultaneously. Mobile devices, pads, it can be done, but it's a hassle. It doesn't always work depending on what hardware you're using. And it's going to be a diminished experience. Recommend desktop infrastructure. So laptop, desktop, that's what we're talking about here, ideally. But if you can't access that, a pad is sufficient. Next, you need a suitable physical environment. And this is a kind of a best effort thing. Obviously, you don't have that much choice into what your physical environment will be at a certain time on a Friday. But insofar as you have choice, insofar as you have control over your surroundings, you should be trying to create an environment that has minimal interruptions so that you're not constantly having your attention divided while you're busy watching the episode. You want to make sure that you've got comfortable seating. You're going to be sitting there for the better part of an hour, sometimes longer, depending. Some weeks more than one episode drops, and then we're going to be sitting there for quite some time. So make sure that you have a comfortable chair and lighting that allows sustained attention. I'm not going to go into a lot of detail about blue light versus red light and that kind of thing, but you want to have a lighting environment that allows you to see your keyboard, see the room around you, but without being too diverted by other things and without falling asleep. So look into what your lighting setup should be and try to exercise as much control over that as you possibly can. And then there's the physiological aspect of it, which is being reasonably rested. If you're too tired, you're not going to be able to concentrate or participate very easily. You want to make sure that you hydrate. Hydration is surprisingly important when it comes to enjoying material like this. And it's just generally good advice. You should always be hydrating. So have yourself a nice beverage on your table next to you while you're watching the episode so that you can hydrate during the course of the mission. And if necessary, you can have a light snack during the mission in order to maintain focus. Eating a heavy meal while you're watching can be distracting, not only because you have to look away from the screen because you're looking at your food, but also because the act of eating and digesting, it sends your physiological resources to your digestive tract instead of to your cognitive faculties, so it's going to be difficult to maintain focus. So eat your meal beforehand, and then if necessary, a snack to help you maintain focus during the briefing. Easy as that. Aim is simple. The body is distracted or uncomfortable, the mental and emotional readiness will suffer. All right, next one. Mental readiness is the second pillar. And this is mostly about contextual awareness. The thing about modern Star Trek is that it assumes narrative memory. And what that means is that there is a colossal body of work, a huge canon, close to 1,000 episodes worth at this point. And the writers have seen most, or if not all, of that material. And they are expecting that you have seen most, if not all, of that material as well. Now, that's not necessarily a reasonable expectation, especially if somebody is a relatively new Star Trek fan. It does literally take years to get through all of that material. So nobody's expecting you to have seen all of canon. But it does behoove you to have seen as much of it as you reasonably can. And there is a rule of thumb that allows you to focus your studying efforts when it comes to preparing for a given episode. And that is what I call temporal context. Now, in the Star Trek narrative, you'll be aware, of course, that it spans a period of roughly 1,000 years, and there are clusters of Star Trek content in at least 3 different periods: the mid 23rd century, the mid to late 24th century, and now in the 32nd century, which is set in, probably, barring time travel or shenanigans. And that should allow you to figure out which episodes occur in roughly that period. And you want to be watching, you want to have studied up on the material that's sort of immediately before, and if possible, immediately after the content that you're viewing, so that you know how to contextualize in a temporal space where that episode is going to take place. For example, Star Trek Strange New Worlds is set in the mid 23rd century. It is immediately after the first 2 seasons of Star Trek Discovery and a couple of years before the original series. So for getting the maximum benefit out of viewing Star Trek Strange New Worlds, you'll want to have watched recently Star Trek Discovery, at least the first 2 seasons, and Star Trek, the original series, all 3 seasons, so that you can sort of sandwich that in its appropriate place in the Star Trek timeline. The other series that's ongoing at the moment is Star Trek Starfleet Academy, which occurs in the 32nd century, which is after season 3 of Star Trek Discovery. So you want to have, correction, after season 5 of Star Trek Discovery. So you want to have watched seasons 3, 4, and 5 of Star Trek Discovery to know where we are in the timeline. And there are 2 episodes, moments in the Star Trek canon that occur after Star Trek Starfleet Academy. The final episode of season 5 of Star Trek Discovery includes a time jump of several decades. So most of the episodes most of that final episode takes place a few months before the events of Star Trek Starfleet Academy season 1. So the beginning of that episode, then there's a jump. In that jump occurs Star Trek Starfleet Academy. The end of the episode is set several decades later. And then there is one more episode, which is Star Trek Short Trek's Calypso, which is set 1,000 years later. So in order to get that temporal context for Star Trek Starfleet Academy, you'll want to have seen basically the whole of Star Trek Discovery and Calypso to understand where it fits in the timeline. As it happens, we're starting to learn that there are characters in Star Trek Starfleet Academy that come to that show from basically throughout the rest of canon. So you probably want to have seen all of Star Trek Voyager and all of Star Trek Deep Space Nine as well in order to get that more thorough context. But if you can't get through all of that material in time, Discovery is pretty much what you want to see. So that's your temporal awareness. In terms of getting through the whole canon, we have that daily devotional project, which allows us to review one episode per day in chronological sequence from the beginning of canon all the way through to the end, and then back to the beginning again, which does take several years to go through at this point, just because there are so many episodes. So I recommend that as a mechanism for becoming familiar with the whole Star Trek canon. You have an opportunity to share that experience with the rest of the crew. But if you haven't got that familiarity, you can take a snapshot and target your familiarity with that temporal context of the episode that's coming up. So that's useful. So highest level of readiness, an officer has viewed the whole Star Trek canon, has done so multiple times, and has a strong intuitive grasp of the tone and the thematic evolution of the franchise, of the canon. I don't like using the word franchise. Not that it's not a franchise, it's just that feels like it cheapens it, turns it into a commercial product, which it is, but it's much more than that to us. So that level of familiarity is ideal, but it's not required. We don't expect that of you. What is strongly encouraged is that temporal readiness, being familiar with the episodes immediately prior and immediately following the current series or season, understanding the current season arcs and character states. So this means that, again, if you've missed an episode, you've missed a week, you want to be catching up on that episode so that you're up to speed on what's happening. Because remember that modern series all use that system where there are story arcs that persist throughout the season and possibly even multiple seasons. Back in the 1960s, they didn't really do that. Even in the 80s, when the Next Generation was coming out, that wasn't all that popular, but now it's standard across all series. Even shows that are designed to be relatively isolated in episodes, like Strange New Worlds, they try to give it as episodic a feeling as possible. Even they can't get away from those longer story arcs that persist over multiple episodes. That's just how storytelling is done in a series format now. So you don't want to be missing episodes. If you miss a week's watch party, make sure that you're catching up with that episode before we get to the next week. So it's not about encyclopedic knowledge. It's about situational awareness and understanding where we are in the world, in the Star Trek world, so that your engagement and your discussion are informed rather than reactive. So you're not completely lost by stuff that's out of context. You want to be up to speed on as much of that context as possible. The third leg is the emotional, or as we're going to begin calling it, spiritual readiness. So this is the emotional concern around things like posture and orientation. So for watch parties, this means, I don't mean physical posture, I mean behavioral posture, how we're behaving to one another. So for watch parties, that means exhibiting courtesy towards the work, the new Star Trek episode, and towards our fellow crew who are present with us in the watch party. It means loyalty to Star Trek as a cultural and philosophical institution, and not a commercial product. I mentioned this a moment ago. Star Trek is a commercial product. It is a franchise. It is a brand, but it's also a lot more than that. And we're here because we all recognize that it is much more than simply that. It's not just a form of entertainment. It is a work of literature, a body of work that has momentum and creates things that we're hoping to emulate in real life. So demonstrating loyalty to that material as a whole is the appropriate framing for this kind of context. Again, you don't have to love every episode of Star Trek the same. You don't have to love every Star Trek series the same. But recognizing that Star Trek as a whole is the reason that we're here, that's the loyalty that I'm talking about here. I strongly encourage demonstrating a willingness to meet new material on its own terms. It's so easy to look online and hear people drawing conclusions based on little to no material and bringing those conclusions with you to the new content. I strongly advise against doing that. I scroll past people who are sharing opinions about new Star Trek on Instagram or TikTok or Facebook. I don't want to hear it. I want to evaluate the new material on its own terms. Once it's finished being released, and once I've had an opportunity to develop my own position about it, then I'm open to hearing from other Star Trek fans out in the world about what they think. And then I can see whether or not I agree. I might allow their position to inform mine, or I might completely reject it on that basis. But going into those kinds of discussions out in the world about new Star Trek content is meaningless unless you've actually brought that content on board, unless you've actually seen it, right? You've actually experienced it yourself. So willingness to meet that new material on its own terms, I think, is very important. Likewise, deferring value judgments until the episode has been properly absorbed. So that means watching it once or twice, discussing it, thinking about it for a few days. And by value judgment, I mean deciding whether or not it's any good. Whether it's something that you like, whether it's something you don't like, those kinds of value judgments. I strongly recommend trying to avoid making those kinds of conclusions about the new material until you've had an opportunity to properly absorb it. Watching it once or twice, discussing it with the crew, thinking it over, reading online. Let those value judgments settle over time rather than jumping to them in the moment. You don't have to have an opinion about that straight away. Nobody's expecting you. In fact, nobody wants you to have that opinion right away. Arrive at it slowly. Start with an open mind and then work from there. Further to that, I would request avoiding grievance first engagement during the watch party itself. I know it's tempting, especially if a given Star Trek show is not your favorite, that you've already made up your mind about this whole series or this whole season or any episode that's written by this person or starring that character or something like that. It's easy to slip into a pattern of, oh, there it goes again. It's doing that thing that I criticized last time. It's tempting. I feel tempted by that too sometimes, but I would strongly recommend avoiding that kind of grievance first stuff. Let the grievances come later and try to absorb it on its own terms first. Let it speak to you, let it send you its message, and then evaluate it after the fact. This doesn't require you to be uncritical, right? You You are allowed to criticize. You are not required to love it all equally. But what it requires is discipline in sequencing, right? Letting your emotions layer on top of each other in a proper sequence, right? Encounter your first, and allow yourself to encounter it first, and then evaluate it later. The watch party is a shared ritual of encounter. So this is the first point of contact. Critique has its place, just not at the expense of the moment itself. You don't want to be ruining it for other people. So how these pillars work together in this mission. For watch parties, your physical readiness protects your attention, your mental readiness protects your understanding, and your spiritual readiness protects the shared experience. Improvement in any one of those pillars improves the quality of the participation for everybody, right? So we're all bringing our best selves to this mission, and we're making it a better experience for everyone who's there. And that's why readiness here isn't about permission to attend. It's about choosing to prepare in ways that honor the mission and the community executing it, the community being the Dauntless crew. Something I want to make sure to mention here, I don't want this to sound too serious, right? We're not doing a Catholic mass here. This isn't a religious ritual, although it has elements in common with that. Joking around in the chat during watch parties is perfectly acceptable and frankly healthy and encouraged for missions like this, right? Perfectly fine. Nothing wrong with that at all. I love a good meme as much as anybody else. Spontaneous humor, shared reactions, playful commentary, these are normal expressions of people who are enjoying a shared experience together. That's just what humans do. They're part of what makes these watch parties, and frankly, any of these kinds of live events, feel communal rather than transactional. Nothing in the mission-specific readiness framework is intended to suppress that. So even though it sounded very serious up until this point, I want to make sure that I don't want anybody to feel like they can't make jokes. The only expectation is that the humor doesn't become a substitute for engagement or a vehicle for grievance before the material has had time to land. So you're just posting memes instead of watching, then you're missing the point. Or if you're getting sarcastic about what's going on the screen, that's also kind of ruining it for people. By all means, levity, humor, those are perfectly acceptable ways to process what you're seeing. Love it. But let's be mindful of where those lines are and try not to overstep them. Not that I'm suggesting anybody has done that, just it's something that we should be mindful of as we go ahead. Beyond that, the watch party should feel alive, not restrained. The only thing to be mindful of is the difference between having fun with the experience and slipping into early sarcasm about the material itself. The watch party is meant to be a space for that first encounter. So we're coming into it fresh, we're coming into it with open minds and open hearts and absorbing it together. And the more critical or evaluative takes are better held until afterwards, until later. And there'll be plenty of opportunity for those kinds of discussions as we move. Okay, I've got in my notes here, priority 1, feature films. I've already talked about that. So I'm just going to move on to the closing because we've already gone quite a long time here. Mission readiness on the Dauntless is a practice of continuous self-improvement, not a standard to be met, right? There's no bar that we have to reach. It's about becoming the best possible officer that you can. And today we have applied that doctrine to a specific mission profile, the first of what will probably be many, which is the New Trek watch parties. We looked at why these missions matter, why they're classified as priority 2, and how trust, autonomy, and consequence coexist in that space. We explored what the physical, mental, and spiritual readiness look like for that mission, including the preparation, the context, the posture, and the tone. The aim here isn't to regulate behavior, but to help each of us, each officer, show up a little more ready each time for the mission, for the community, and for the institution that we serve. All right, let's see if we have any questions. I did see something highlighted earlier. Let's see what we've got. Oh, that's not today. That was last time. Okay, there we go. This is from Colonel Yobert. Plus different members notice different things. There's a lot of background stuff I don't notice that someone else points out in the moment, and it's really nice to have those things highlighted. Yes, I completely agree. I notice certain kinds of details because they're the sort of things that I'm tuned to look for. I'm looking at uniforms, I'm looking at technology in the background. I'm not necessarily going to notice character related stuff that's happening in the background. And especially with the newer content, there's so much of that happening. If you go back to the original series and the next generation, you'll notice that the backgrounds are typically very plain. They're not very noisy. There's not a lot of stuff going on that back there. And that was by design because that was the visual language of television in those days. These days, that's changed a lot. In any given scene, there's likely to be a lot going on in the background, and looking for that content creates extra context, and highlighting it in the chat is great because then we're all learning from each other. It's a lot of fun. It's one of the best things about these watch parties. We have multiple eyes watching the same material instead of just our own. Okay. I'm not seeing anything in the YouTube chat. I just want to say hello to everybody who's here. We've got Colonel Yobert, we've got Captain Grafkrenan, we've got Lieutenant Lively, and we've got Master Chief Kotza. Welcome, everybody. And then my yeoman has submitted a few questions as well. First up, if watch parties are priority 2, how many can I realistically miss before it becomes a problem? I think that's the wrong way to think about it. I mean, there is a number, but let's try not to focus on what that number is. So ideally, we want to be showing up at as many priority 2 missions as we possibly can, because they are important, because they matter. It should be the default that if there's a priority 2 mission on, that we're going to be going, unless something happens, right? Unless you're working late, or unless someone's in hospital, or unless there's a power failure or whatever. Unless something happens that prevents you from being there, you really should be there. There is a number, and that number is 50% in the last time period, since your last promotion, the last year, whatever, depending on what the advancement is that we're thinking about, the time period will vary. But if you've attended less than 50% of priority 2 missions over whatever that time period might be, that's going to be a barrier to advancement. You're not going to get kicked out or whatever. That's not going to happen. You're not being punished for not attending priority 2 missions, but we will be reading that signal as something that matters, right? We want everybody to attend. We expect everybody to attend. And if you're consistently not attending, then that's telling us something about you and your level of engagement with the crew. Question 2. How much preparation is actually expected before a watch party? None of it is actually expected, right? So if you just want to rock up and log in and participate, that's fine. There's nothing at all wrong with that. The more preparation you can do, the better the experience will be for you, and the more you'll be contributing towards the experience for everybody else. The more prepared you can be, the better. But none of that preparation is actually expected. We're happy to just have you there. Right, we'd rather you be there completely unprepared and looking at it with fresh eyes, with not a thought in your head, than not being there despite having done all the encyclopedic research ahead of time. So rather be there unprepared than not be there at all. But the more preparation, the better. Question 3. Is it okay if I've already watched the episode before the watch party? I did mention this, and yes. Absolutely, there's nothing wrong with that. I would argue that it is a good way to prepare for the mission. It's my standard practice that I like to do that. Reason being is I like my first encounter with the new Star Trek episode to be completely silent with no distractions whatsoever. I need to be able to absorb the material completely unencumbered by any kind of other sort of cognitive distractions that might be happening. And then my second viewing, I like that to be a communal experience. So I encourage that as a practice. If you're planning to join the watch party on the Friday night, if you can, try to carve out another hour for yourself earlier in the same day, or maybe the previous evening, where you can watch the episode yourself without any distractions. The only key I would suggest is try to make those 2 viewings as close together in time as you practically can, because you don't want those opinions to have crystallized in your mind by the time you get to the second viewing with the crew. You want those to be relatively close so that you can still keep your perceptions open with that second viewing. So it's still an authentic shared first contact experience, and you're not just coming in like a jaded, oh, well, I've already seen this. You don't want that to be your perception or your attitude as you're entering the event. All right, I'm not seeing any more comments or questions, so I think we can probably call it there. And with that in mind, I leave you with this thought. Watch parties aren't a filter between real work. Correction, let me try that again. Watch parties aren't a filler between real work. They are the work. How you show up matters, because this is one of the spaces where the Dauntless actually lives. Thank you. That is all for today. You are dismissed. Swart out.
The Starfleet life with the USS Dauntless. Are you brave enough to be a Starfleet officer? Do you have what it takes